Hello, my name is Lee Taylor, and I really like to knit, so much so that some of my friends call me the Knitwit. I hope you enjoyed today's video and possibly even learned something. So let's get started. This week we have a stash dive into the greens, we have project updates, there is swatching to do, and finally a bonus clip at the end. So let's get started. Today we're looking at the yarn in the green section. We are already a third of the way done. We've completed 4 colors and only 8 more to go. Here we have all of the green yarns for this week's video. For this week's video's stash dive, I should say. So we're just going to jump straight in and start off with the DK weight. This is Bernat or Bernat, B-E-R-N-A-T. Softy, Baby, Solids, and Marls. It is a DK weight. 140 grams gives you 362 yards. And that is all here. It's wound very, very tight. So it is all, I don't have separate cakes for this one. It is 100% acrylic. And the colorway is grass green. And it's got a very nice shine to it. Next, we jump straight to an Aran weight, and this is Big Twist Soft. 170 grams gives you 320 yards. This is not the entire skein. This one is broken up into cakes. It is 100% acrylic, and the colorway is avocado, which I think is a pretty good representation. It's not a fresh avocado. It's like it's been set out for a few moments and it starts to oxidize and turn brown. But it's still a very, very pretty color. It reminds me not only of avocado, but of like a moss. Next, we have Big Twist Value Solids. This also is an Aran weight. This one is also broken up into 2 separate cakes. And 170 yards gives you 170 grams gives you 380 yards. 100% acrylic. And the color is light green. And it's showing up a little bit darker on screen than it is in person, but otherwise it's the same. It's kind of a satiny matte finish. Just the tiniest bit of any sort of sheen, but only if the light's on it. I mean, it's not just a shiny yarn like that Bernat was. Next, we have one of a very favorite yarn of mine. It's very soft. This is Lion Brand's Heartland yarn. It is an Aran weight. 142 ounces gives you 251 yards, which is kind of an odd size to get 142 ounces, but OCD aside, that's what you get. It's 100% acrylic, and it's the Heartland brand. They chose national parks and important places in America, and this one is named after Kings Canyon. And I love it because it has to me like a silverish undertone to it. Almost like, I mean, there's just a lot of depth to this color. And I love it. It's very soft and it's just a joy to work with. I've worked with this and knit a shawl, in fact. I may have knit a hat also. I don't recall, but I do know I knit a prayer shawl with this. Next, we have Premier Yarns in their Just Yarn series. It is an Aran weight. 60 yards gives you 60 grams gives you 131 yards. It is all acrylic and the color is simply green. It's a very olive military fatigue kind of green. And this one already has plans for what it's going to be. Next, we have a cotton yarn. I cannot tell you any more than that. All that I know is that it is cotton. This is one that I actually claimed myself. You can kind of distracted myself here, but you can actually kind of see, if it'll focus, you can see the strands, the plies and it's almost like it wants to come apart on its own. And the reason for that, I have 2 cakes this size. The reason that I have that is, let me zoom out here and show you this. I took a commercial knit sweater, and I'll show you this in the overhead afterwards, but I just took a commercial knit full-on sweater, and I separated the sleeve because it was sewn on, and I just separated the sleeve from it and made it into a sweater vest, and I took the yarn from the sleeves to give me that I can knit something with. I do know, like I said, I do know that it's all cotton, and we can actually weigh it here on the screen. So let's see what we've got here. Okay, our first cake is 124 grams. Our second cake is 125 grams. So that's a good bit of yarn that I can use to knit something. I'm not sure which would be, this is coming up 249, 250 grams. It kind of changes its mind. But that gives me a good bit of yarn that I can knit something with. I don't know what the yardage is for that. I don't know what size. I just know that I've got a bunch of cotton green yarn. The brand of the sweater, if it matters, some people may think it's interesting, but it's an Eddie Bauer sweater. Just a simple machine knit cotton sweater. So that is the final of the green yarns. I'll bring them all out here. I apologize if my table is shaky. I'm trying to sort up the best way to film, and this table is still a bit shaky for all of that. So we have the Bernay soft grass green, the Big Twist Aran avocado, Big Twist Value Solid light green, Lion Brand Heartland Kings Canyon, Premier Just Yarn green, and the reclaimed cotton yarn. So that is the stash die for my green yarn. Okay, here we have the store-bought cotton sweater, the cotton sweater, and I just, like I said, I just removed the arms. I unsewed the arms because it was, the front and back was knit separately on this, and then the arms were knit separately. So I was able to simply separate the arm, unravel it, and wind it up into a cake. I was originally going to have this almost like an apron, an open-sided, almost like a poncho, I guess you would. So the seam was open, so I re-seamed it, and I just used blanket stitch, which does not give a pretty result. What it does do, however, is it gives a very strong seam, and that to me was more important. So here it is on this other side, and I, like I said, I just did blanket stitch across it, and I overkilled because I even took the ends and I touched them with just a dot of super glue. So the seam is not going anywhere. Not that it would have, not that it should have, but I was just wanted to overkill and make sure this did not come apart. So that is how I reclaimed that green cotton yarn that you will see in the overhead section. For this week's Swatch Lab, we are going to knit across live stitches, which is the way that I added my pocket into the Yerba Lee Yerba sweater. I discussed it in the overhead, but I'm going to show you up close on how that actually works. So what I did is I knit up my little, what I'm calling my little pocket insert, and it's just a single little bit of fabric. I just did it in garter stitch. Nothing fancy, just 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 stitches wide and a few rows long. And I put that on a stitch holder. It's coming up very brassy, but it's actually a red. And you just slide this through those are live stitches, which means they can still be worked. And you just lock it like that so that way it does not unravel. So I did that, and then I knit up a section in this Kings Canyon yarn, and I did 20 stitches across here. So I can knit 4 stitches, have my 12, and then 4 stitches. So I'm going to show you what you do with that. So before we can add this to this, we have to bind off these 12 stitches in the middle. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So what you do is you come through, and I'm using double pointed needles just because they're shorter and it's easier to film with. So you just come through, and when you're binding off, you can either bind off using knit stitches or purl stitches. In this, I'm going to do knit stitches. So all you do is you come across and you knit a stitch, knit a second stitch. Let me zoom in a bit here. Okay, so we got 2 stitches on the right hand needle, and we're going to take the tip of this needle and go through the leg and catch that first stitch like that. And we're just going to pull it up and over like this, okay? But I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I need 4 stitches over here before I start that. So 2, 3, and 4, okay? So this needle will always have at least 4 stitches on it, okay? So we're going to do the first of our bind off stitch. So we're going to knit a stitch, knit a stitch. Okay, now we got to keep our 4 stitches, but we need to get rid of these 2. So we're going to pick up that leg of that stitch and pull it up and over that other stitch like so. So now we have bound off 1 stitch, and see that hole? That's the bind off. So now we're going to knit another stitch. Okay, so we have our 4 edge stitches and these 2 stitches here. And this stitch here is the one that we pulled the other stitch over. Now we're going to grab that stitch and pull it over this new stitch. So we've now bound off 2 stitches. And as you can see, that hole is getting wider as we're working across. So you simply knit and put a new stitch on your right needle, then take that other leg and flip it up and over. Okay, and you're just going to work across until you have 4 stitches left on this needle. Okay, so I'll show you what that means when we get over here to it, because you've got to do something slightly different on one end than you do the other, and I'll explain that when we can get over here. So let me just bind off these 12 stitches real quick. And I wanted to make sure I bound this off on camera so that way I can not only show you how to knit across live stitches, but also show you how to bind off at the same time. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 swatch lab, which I'm always for. No reason to just learn one thing in a video. So we're just zooming right across, binding off stitches, and you want to bind off loosely. Otherwise, it can be so snug that your fabric tends to pucker, and I apologize, I went off screen. I was looking at my knitting rather than the screen. Okay, so now, okay, we have 4 stitches left over here, 4 stitches here, and 2 here. So we got to bind off this one. Okay, but see, now here's our dilemma. 4 stitches, a bind off stitch, and 4 stitches. So we only need a total of 8 stitches. So what are we going to do with this one? Well, we're going to knit another stitch from our border stitch over here. like so, and bind it off. Bind off that last one. So now we have 4 for this edge and 4 for this edge. So we have our number that we need, and now we're just going to knit regular, and we no longer need to bind off. And we just knit right across. Okay? So here, you can see we bound off and have our little border stitches. So now we can take and insert our pocket into that spot. Now let me show you how that works. So we're going to turn our work, and I'm working in garter, so it's only going to be knit, and I'm going to unclip this like this, okay? So that way I have access to these live stitches here. So we are going to knit these first 4 stitches just as if they were any other stitches, you know, just knitting as usual. So we're going to knit 4, like so. Now we're going to drop that needle, you know, making sure we don't drop stitches off of it. So I usually like to move it down to the middle. So drop that needle and pick up this. Now, since this has a exposed point, I can treat this as a needle. I don't have to worry about these stitches being too small because they were worked by the size needle that I needed, so the size was already set, so I don't have to worry about these being too snug. So I just treat this as if it was a regular needle. So you just go in like you would regular and simply knit that stitch. Okay? It's going to be a bit loose because there's only one single strand of yarn holding these together, but we can fix that here in a bit. So we just go through and just keep knitting off of this stitch holder as if it was any regular needle, and we're just going to go across and knit. And what we're doing here is we are knitting across live stitches. Okay, so we are just working our way across, you know, knitting the 12 off of this stitch marker, or stitch holder rather, sorry. Guess you could use it as a very large stitch marker though. So we're knitting across. And again, this is the exact same method that I used when I attached the pocket to the yerba li yerba. Okay. Now this stitch is also a bit loose because that's the tail end, but we can adjust that also. So we knit that, and now we can let go of this, and this is the tail end. This was the working end of the yarn, so we can just pull that down, and that'll tighten that up. Now we need to go back and pick up this needle again, and we need to finish knitting across. You know, I give that a little tug to, you know, snug that up. Knit one stitch and knit the second stitch, and when I go to knit the second stitch, I give that another tug to pull out any slack between the stitches I added from the white and the rest of the body of the green. Okay, we just knit across like no big deal. Okay, now we have attached that as one piece, so let's look and see what it looks like on the other side. So over here you can kind of get a glimpse. Let me move this out of the way and zoom in. Now you can get an idea of what the pocket looks like. You've got the outer section, and you've created this open bit that would be the pocket. You know, and your hand would go in, you know, and set in here like this. So what you would do when it's all said and done, and I'm going to knit another row and show you, but you would go through and you would use some yarn or some thread or something and sew there, there, and up there, okay? But, and you can see right there how we joined, you can see that little ridge of green stitches. So now let's go through and knit one more pass across, and so you can see how I adjust the holes in that section where we added those that white pocket insert, where we added the live stitches. So we just knit across to those spots. So we knit our 4 and 4. Okay, so now we're at the pocket insert, and see how loose that is? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, pull that snug a bit, knit, and then pull snug again. So we're just going to continue knitting across. You know, we pulled that snug, so that pulls out the slack, and we're going to knit across to the next one. Now you don't want to pull that so tight that the fabric puckers. You just want to make sure that it's nice and snug. So we're going to knit across these new 12 stitches, or 12 stitches we re-added because we took 12 out here and added the 12 new one here. So we're just knitting across this swatch pocket. And this is a very simple way of adding a pocket, one of the simplest ways. Okay, so we're 4 stitches and right here, so that's going to be our gappy spot. You can see right there how that stitch is kind of stretched out. We're going to adjust that. So we're going to come through, knit the final one on that pocket swatch, come up here, knit 1 regular, and then right here we're going to take and pull that snug and knit up right here and knit across. Okay, so now we have a full ridge of new stitches. So let me zoom in again. So here is the back, again with that full ridge of ones, and that right there you're seeing the knit stitches on the garter stitch. Over here you can see the little purl bumps from last week's, I believe it was last week's, the swatch that shows what a row of stitches looks like. Now if you see right here, that section is still loose. So what we can do is we can come back. Oh, I don't have that because I joined right there. What we can do is when we go to block it, we simply take a needle and we stretch some of these other stitches, and what that will do is that will spread that gapped stitch across those other stitches. It kind of balances that out in both ways. What I was looking for on the back side was the tail, that I could take and pull that snug and kind of pull that down, but I don't have that because what would have been the tail right there continued knitting across. This week in the project updates, we're going to take a look at my blueberry socks, the 46 limit cardigan, and the temperature Afghan. There is no Gnome update this week. I have not worked on any, but those are our project updates, so let's go and take a look at those right now. First in the updates, I'm going to show you what I've gotten done with the sock. There are stitch markers everywhere, and so I'll explain those, but the important part right now is that I have finished the foot section. So next I work on the heel, then the leg, the cuff, bind off, and then I can wear my pair of socks, and I will take a picture and show that on the next video. Here we're going to discuss the blueberry socks in depth. Here's the foot side where the sole of my foot will go, and I'll show you that so you can see it unadulterated by all of the stitch markers. So here, down here, of course we have the toe, and then from about this point, and you'll be able to see it better on the other side, from this point up to here is the foot. So each section has its own designated name. Here we have the top of the foot, or what is known as the instep, and again the brass marker. Let me clear away some of this yarn here. These brass markers here and here signify when the sub-project section is complete. So here we have the end of the toe, and here we have the end of the foot. The yellow markers mark every 20 rows, so I can keep track and compare that to the other sock. And the silver stitch markers shows what I worked on that day. So this was all knit in one day, this was all knit in one day, and that was knit in one day. And I'm not doing the daily stitch markers on everything, but I did want to see how quickly I can knit up a sock for future reference. So that is the blueberry sock up close, and I'm excited. So next I have the heel to do, and it's a German short row heel. This is a rounded barn toe, and just worked in stockinette. And when you're knitting in the round, remember, you get stockinette by knitting every stitch. If you're knitting flat, you knit across and then you turn your work and purl back. But if you're knitting in the round, you never turn your work. So you're always knitting, and that gives you stockinette. To get purl, you would simply reverse stockinette. So I'm hoping to do, I've got another sock that I've got to do in the overall project. I'm making 4 socks, each one in a different size yarn. And on the next sock, I may try to knit this backside with reverse stockinette showing, so that way the purl bumps are on the outside and the smooth side is inside, because sometimes the texture of those purl bumps bothers my feet because my nerves are hypersensitive. So I'm thinking about doing that. So it'll be knit on this side, knit showing, and on this side it'll be purl side showing, and that's called a princess sole. From the fairy tale Princess and the Pea, where they can feel even the slightest bumps and textures. So that is the blueberry socks, and a glimpse into what I have planned in the future for other sock projects. Next we have the Limit cardigan. You can see how much further I am on the underarm than I was last week. It has to be 27 inches long from the top down to the very bottom. Get those out of the way. Down to the very bottom here. I'm at 22 inches, so I only like 5 inches to go. And then this sub-project, the cardigan project, will be completed. Once this is completed, then I can allow myself to start a new project. So I'm excited to not only get to wear this, but so that way I can start something new. So I'm very excited with the progress I've made on the cardigan this week. Last in the updates, I'm going to show a picture here of the Take My Temperature or Carter or Temperature Afghan. And I have completed January through May, so I'm almost at the halfway point of 190,500 stitches in the entire project. So I'm very close to halfway done, and I am very excited to see that. I'm not going to attempt to show it on screen and hold it up because it's massive, and you'll see that as you've seen that on the picture. Also, there will be no Gnome updates this week. I set the Gnome project aside until I got the back panel on the cardigan finished, because I wanted to get that caught up, because I have a very special timeline on that. So no Gnome projects this week. I have mentioned multiple times, not only just in this week's episode, but in other episodes and in just communicating with all of my viewers, about the need for me to get something finished before I start something new. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that this week. On Ravelry, which is the website and database that I use for all of my knitting related things, there is a section where you can set yourself a challenge for the year. And I set myself a challenge of having 25 projects completed by December 31st. I am 15 projects done with that, so I'm at 60% of my challenge, which is amazing news. And yes, it's only June. However, if I can go past that goal, then that would be just fantastic. I don't win any prizes or anything. It's just a self-set goal. I will probably treat myself to something if I can get that done and go over that mark. To that end, I want to talk about a condition that knitters sometimes have called cast-on-itis. It's not a real condition, but we jokingly say that we have cast-on-itis, and that is where we enjoy casting on projects so much that we have more cast-on projects sometimes than we have needles. And so stuff gets put on waste yarn, and you get the needles from that and you start knitting on another project. So I'm trying to prevent myself from having cast-on-itis as long as I possibly can, because I have 4 projects that are whips and 2 projects that are UFOs. So of my 25 projects, if I can knock out even a few of those whips, now granted some of them are long processes. So my goal mostly is based on me getting my gnomes done. However, I'm not letting myself cast on gnomes until I get finished with a sub-project. So like I mentioned, the back panel of the cardigan is a sub-project. So there'll be a back panel, a front, left, front, right, and left and right sleeve. So there will be 5, at least. There may be a 6 if I do a button band. 5 sub-projects within that. So once I finish a sub-project, then I give myself leeway, if you'll pardon the pun, to cast on a new project. So I'm trying to cast on projects that will be worked quickly, so that way I don't get bogged down with UFOs like I was this time last year. Because I don't want my projects and yarn just sitting there not being used. I mean, I know I have stash back here that, it may take a few years before I get to it, but I don't want something that's actually in progress to sit there for an extended period of time. If I'm not knitting on it, then rip it out, put the yarn away. I may find a better use for it later. So that is a short summary on what my knitting challenge for this year is versus cast-on-itis, and how I am working on overcoming cast-on-itis, because I have a lot of really fun projects. There's a project for me personally that I want to do this year. Aside from what I've already got started, there's a new project for me that I want to get started. Possibly 2 new projects I want to get started for me personally. And then there are 4 projects that I'm working on the design for that I would like to get at least cast on this year, or finish swatching and see that that is what I like. And if all goes according to my plan, I will have a daily, not necessarily daily challenge isn't the right word, but a project that I want to knit through the month of October. I've got the temperature Afghan, I've got the gnomes. I talked about knitting a scarf with the color of the gnomes for each month. But I had a very cool idea of knitting a special project throughout the month of October using one of the patterns that I am designing. Again, that only will happen if all goes according to plan. If it doesn't, then I can scrap that and do it next October. So there's no time crunch on starting projects, but there are time crunches on getting certain projects finished. Like the temperature Afghan, I have to finish the last stripe of that pattern on January 1st, because I won't get the for sure high temperature for December 31st until the next day. So once January 1st is here, then I can knit that last stripe and then knit the black band border. So I'm wanting to have all of the knitting done on January 1st. Then I will have all those multiple ends to weave in. I don't know if I'm going to set aside a few days and weave those in as I go along further, or if I will just set that aside and do that on finish it February and just spend all of February weaving in the ends. So I'm not exactly certain how some things are going, where other things are going to jump in, but I do know that there's a lot of exciting things that I have planned, and I'm very excited to get those started. Again, I will wait to cast on a project until I complete a sub-project. So another example of a sub-project would be on the socks. I finished the foot, so I allowed myself to swatch for one of my projects. Then when I finish the heel, that is considered a sub-project, and so then I can start a whole new project. Gnomes don't count as a project because I'm playing catch-up, and they only take 2 to 4 days. It's very, very quick, so I don't really count those as a project because I can whip those out so quickly. But other things like the cardigans, the blanket, of course, will be an all-year project. I've got a shawl and scarf and the socks, so some of those, you know, takes a little bit longer. So I'm trying to get those projects knocked out as quickly as possible, because I would love to wear the limit cardigan in September, or at least have it finished by September. And I would absolutely love to have the yerba cardigan finished by the end of September as well, so I can at least wear both of them, even for just a moment, on my birthday. Because those, the yerba cardigan is a birthday present to myself. The temperature Afghan is a Christmas gift to myself. So I'm excited to get those done and see what the new year has for me. I know it's only June now, but that doesn't stop me from being excited for the year to come. So I hope you enjoyed this week's video, and stay tuned for more things. And I would love to hear if anyone has any questions. I can do a little question and answer bit at the end of my weekly videos. So if you have any questions, please be sure to send them over to me. And I love getting recommendations for segments in future videos. So thank you for watching.